Welcome to this edition of Diligence Inside America's Boardrooms. I'm TK Kerstetter, and I'll be your host for today's show. Today, we're going to be talking about how the boardroom is constantly changing and our corporate directors keeping pace. And joining me is someone that will offer a lot to this discussion. And please welcome Ralph de la Vega, who's a board member with American Express, New York Life Insurance Company, and Amdocs Corporation. So it's a pleasure. Welcome, Ralph.
It's great to be here, TK.
I think I'm safe to say that the world of corporate boards is changing very rapidly, and all kinds of pressures are doing that. Investor pressures with a new administration. We got rule changes. You got cyber. You got ESG, social pressures. I mean, everything is changing the boardroom, particularly over the last 5 years. So you've been a board member long enough that you've been impacted by these changes. So what changes do you feel have been significant, and how it's changed not only the boardroom, but who sits in the boardroom today?
Yeah, TK, because I serve on those three boards, as you mentioned, one of which is a bank holding board. One of the most significant changes was the Dodd-Frank regulation, which is more than 5 years ago, but it's still being felt in corporate boardrooms. The implementation of a risk committee and having people on the board that understand the regulatory and compliance environment in a financial institution is key today. So that's number one. Number two, cyber. I think cybersecurity is at the top of everybody's mind. In 2 out of the 3 companies that I serve on, we added directors that had cybersecurity expertise. By that, I mean that they're executives that have a background of cyber, but are not cybersecurity experts per se. They just have the expertise to help a board deal with a cyber attack should one happen, and to get prepared for how to mitigate it. And then the third piece is a little broader, but I think the pandemic itself, TK, has dramatically changed the conversation in the boardroom. We had to deal with, people working from home, dealing with supply chain issues, and then how to get back to work. And we're still in the middle of that. So I think what you see happening is an inclusiveness of everybody around the board, trying to understand how to help a company deal with an issue that we have never seen in our lifetime before. So I would say, in my opinion, those are the three. An emerging issue right now because of the pandemic is also talent retention, upskilling, reskilling of the force, and making sure you have adequate resources from a management point of view to be able to operate effectively.
I will add to that I'm sure the virtual world has certainly changed board meetings from that perspective. And I think we'll probably end up with some mixture of virtual and live board meetings. And the people that I really feel for are those new directors, because it's not quite as easy to get to know people through virtual Zoom meetings as it might be getting together. So I'm sure boards are looking forward to those days when, again, they're meeting at least sometimes in person. So a follow-up question to that is, Ralph, to keep pace and with all the initiatives that are going on, do you see in the companies that you're in conversations about forming board committees outside of the traditional 3? It could be issues like ESG, it could be, a finance committee, it could be a corporate strategy, or even technology. What are you seeing on your boards with respect to those types of conversations?
It's a great question because I serve on 3 boards, and they have 3 separate committees other than the big 3. In one company, we have a risk committee, which is required by regulation. In another company, we have an investment committee because they manage a lot of assets. And so we have to focus on the investment of those assets. And on the third one, it's a technology committee. So we have a risk, we have an investment committee, and we have a technology committee. And the discussion all the time is not necessarily, TK, of how to form a new committee, but if you have something new that comes up, how do you divvy it up into the various committees? How do you change the charters of the committees so you don't end up with a multitude of committees that will be unwieldy and hard to schedule and hard to deal with? So I think what I have experienced in the boards that I serve on is minor adjustments to take into account the hot topics, and one including ESG. We just went through that in my last board meeting. And I think we've covered some of the things that are critical for the company related to ESG within the existing committee structure, but tweaking some of the charters so it's more clear to everyone who is responsible for what in a very complex environment.
Yeah. The challenge of forming new committees is how do you sort of staff them? All of a sudden you've got directors, schedules being filled with multiple committee meetings. At the same time, Ralph, I'm a huge advocate for making sure that the things that are important for a company are dealt with in a committee so that there's a chair of the committee that is responsible for something. I don't like when somebody says, oh, that's the whole board's responsibility. Everything is the whole board's responsibility, but the work that's done in between meetings, as serving as head of the comp committee on some of yours during your tenure, there's a lot of work. And if you have somebody assigned to that on the board, it gets done and it gets done well. But if left to just the whole board, there's nobody really responsible for completing that work. So I understand.
No, I totally agree, TK. And in the three instances that I mentioned, the special committees that were formed, they're absolutely critical to the mission of the company. And the software company, it's a software company that operates on a global basis, and technology is changing so fast that somebody needs to really be expert or have expertise in that field. That's why we have somebody heading a technology committee that is deep into technology issues. By the same token, in the risk committee, we have somebody that has deep knowledge about risk and how to mitigate it, and also has great expertise with regulators on how to deal with the compliance issues, et cetera, et cetera. So I have found that works well. But the key is what you said at the beginning. Each company has to decide what are the key things that are mission critical to that company and have the dedicated resources in the appropriate committees with the appropriate resources from an expertise point of view to make them effective.
Well, that's a great point, and I hope one that our audience hears, because that's exactly the process that I think boards need to go through. So let's I want to make sure that I have this opportunity to bring this topic up before we close our session. But I want to talk about board composition and how that needs to keep pace. And probably so far, when I look at sort of the diversity issue on boards, I would have to say that it's not keeping pace, particularly in the Latina community. That community is the largest ethnic segment in the United States, yet its numbers on the board are certainly behind what it should be. And I was especially disappointed when California passed their diversity law, yet you didn't see the Latina community sort of hold their own with numbers there. So how this gets changed, Ralph, is for Latinos and Hispanics having the opportunity to serve in leadership positions. And I know you haven't had that opportunity, but you don't see it that often. So sitting here, looking at, again, the Latino community, but also other minorities, Asian and African American, how do you think, or what can be done to get those diverse communities into more leadership roles?
Yeah, you make a great point. If you look at the facts, TK, for Latinos or Latinas, over the last decade, the percent of Latinos or Latinas in corporate boards, say Fortune 500 companies, has gone from 3% to 3.8%. It's been flat, essentially, for the last 10 years at a time when the population grew by leaps and bounds. In fact, the latest estimate that I've seen the Census Bureau project is that by 2060, about 28% of the US population will be Hispanic. So that means there's a huge gap, and it's going to keep getting bigger unless we do something about it. I spent a lot of time working with Hispanic organizations and others to convince myself that there is no question there is qualified talent available if people know exactly where to look for them. So one of my recommendations for boards, if they want to get diverse talent in, is to look beyond the current search firms that they're using and the current processes, to look in different places. And the reason I say that is one of the boards that I served on did exactly that. We selected a smaller, more boutique search firm, and we got immediately 2 great minority female candidates, and we put them on the board immediately. Since then, they've given us a third. These people were not visible to us through the current search process. So making sure that you're getting enough of a pool of talent than what you have been looking at. If people tell you that there's not sufficient qualified talent, I can tell you, I've convinced myself that that's just not true. It is there, but you have to look for it. The other thing that I recommend boards to do, TK, is to make sure they're looking at their succession plan in enough detail and far away enough so that they have the flexibility when they see a great diverse candidate that they want to bring on the board. Even if they don't have an opening this year, if you're going to have another one next year, maybe you should consider temporarily increasing the size of the board to put this new diverse candidate in place, perhaps a year ahead of time, and getting that person knowledgeable about the company. So when there is an opening that comes up, that you have somebody that's qualified to fill it. Finally, the third point is we need the help of companies to allow some of their C-suite executives that are women and minorities to serve on boards, because we don't have enough diversity at the CEO level. We know that. So allowing talented, high potential candidates to serve on boards is a great developmental opportunity. It made a huge difference in my career, TK. I volunteered to serve on the board of JA Worldwide early in my career, and I became its chairman several years later. That experience of running an organization with 300,000 volunteers, 3,000 staff members in over 100 countries around the world gave me a board experience that I treasure to this day, and it helped me to serve on the boards that I serve on. So those are the things that I think we need to do to get the Hispanic population and candidates to be board ready, if you will, when the opportunities come.
Well, let me also give a shout out to Esther Aguilera and the Latino Corporate Directors Association. I've had her on the show several times, and her and her team are working tirelessly in making sure that the world knows that there are qualified candidates. And I am happy to say that I have seen numerous announcements lately that are good results from their work. But that's another thing that I would recommend to companies if you want a great source of finding candidates. And my last piece of advice is, with any search firm, be very specific to them, large or small, on exactly what you're looking for. They're geared to do that. But if you don't make that a request narrow enough, then you're leaving it open to not get the kind of candidates that you spoke about. So, Ralph, your experience is very valuable, when we have the opportunity to share these thoughts with our audience. So I want to thank you for taking the time on joining me. It's been my pleasure.
Same here, TK. I'd love to do it again if appropriate.
And that will conclude this edition of Inside America's Boardrooms. We hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back again next week when we take another look at a critical topic that'll help you be a better board member or committee member. So we'll see you then.